over x cubed minus 1. And we also want to determine the limit as x approaches 1 from the right of 1 over x cubed minus 1. And part A says to evaluate using a table of values. And part C asks us to evaluate from the graph of F. Okay, so in part A, and maybe we won't go through all the calculations, but maybe just kind of set up the idea of what's happening. So evaluate using a table of values. So if we're going to use a table of values to evaluate the limit as x approaches 1 from the left, then what I'm thinking about is numbers that are just slightly smaller than 1. So I might make a table. So in part A, we're going to look at values of x and evaluate them in 1 over x cubed. And we're approaching 1 from the left, and so maybe we might start with 0.5, then maybe look at 0.9, 0.99, 0.999, and evaluate each of these x values in our function and see what happens. And so as x is approaching 1 from the left, we want to know what happens to these y values. All right, so actually,
That's all it's asking.
that's all it's asking is to plug in these values then here, and then say, okay, are these values getting larger negative or larger positive? And so that's what that's asking. And so that's from the left, and then we do similar values from the right side. Okay. And then in part C, for graphing our function, do you have a picture of what this function looks like?
No.
Would you go ahead and graph it, please? And I know that we're going to end up having a vertical asymptote at x is equal to 1, because when we plug in x equal to 1, we get a positive 1 in the numerator and a 0 in the denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that in right away. It's not like any window yet. Go to your y equals again. Should be okay. Oh, put the x cubed minus 1 in parentheses in the denominator. All right, so double check yours also. Parentheses are in the denominator. Okay, so just as a comment, what I'm seeing when graphing this function, when you want to graph 1 over x cubed minus 1, make sure that you're graphing 1 divided by x to the third minus 1. And make sure your x to the third minus 1 is inside parentheses in that denominator. Otherwise, you'll get something that doesn't quite look like what you might expect. Okay, so if you do graph this function, you should expect to get something that looks like this. And so when I look at this particular function, the limit as x approaches 1 from the left of 1 over x cubed minus 1, well, our y value is getting really large in the negative direction, so we have negative infinity. And the limit, as x approaches 1 from the right, of 1 over x cubed minus 1. As we approach from the right, the y values are getting very large. And hopefully, when you type in these values here, you should see a similar idea. We should get larger and larger values, but negative values.